intrigued by, you said that you kind of sit in the middle between traditional and progressive, but more on the progressive side. But then when you talk about things like transversal learning, interdisciplinary learning, okay, project-based learning is pretty much, it's not normalized as such, but it's quite common in secondary schools and things, but we are also talking to sort of schools that have actually said, your classroom that you've created, that is the school. That, it's not a space. That's the way it works. There are no subjects. There are no, it's all project-based learning, and it's all kind of building in skills, knowledge, yes, but absolutely, the skills and competencies is the major focus. So what I'm wondering again is like, how compatible is that? Do you think that, just to push you a little bit, do you think there has to be a change in that sense? Maybe even still within the broad confines of the traditional model. I mean, is there an argument for example, really kind of permanently breaking these silos between subjects and making learning completely transversal?
Yeah, I believe there is, and I think the starting point for that is at university level. And it's really interesting that this year, amongst the pandemic, the first university in the world to teach an interdisciplinary degree has opened in London. It's been opened by a chap called Ed Feeder, I think his name is. He's the CEO of the 21 School 21 in London, and I think I've got those details right. And essentially, all of us, when we go to university to do a degree, we do a sociology or an education degree. His new degree that they've designed in London is essentially an interdisciplinary degree in that you don't study a subject. You spend 50% of the time solving problems. And if that problem's climate change, because that's what you're interested in, then that's your problem. And if somewhere down the line that throws up an engineering aspect, then you start studying engineering. And the other 50% of the degree, and I find this absolutely fascinating, is about research skills. So understanding quantitative, qualitative data, how to do a research methodology, research questions, hypotheses. So after 3 years of a degree and £9,000 of expenditure, you do not come out with one subject. You come out of a really broad perspective on, and his whole argument for this, and I believe this is true, is that it makes you way more employable because you are able to solve problems, think on your feet, you can work as a team, you can present, you're collaborative. Now, it starts with universities because schools are essentially creating students to go on to that point. So if we can fix it here, that will then filter down to examinations and sort of the entire assessment system. And that's quite exciting too, because there's a lot of movement in the UK to get rid of exams as they are. The reason for that is because the algorithm that was used last year failed and loads of students didn't get the grades that they wanted, giving AI a really bad name, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, what about a system whereby those exams disappeared and students were assessed as a combination of project-based interdisciplinary learning and some micro tests? And rather than them all sitting exams in June, maybe a staged assessment point over a course of 14 months where students take the assessment when they're ready. That's another thing that's really exciting. And I think if it started at university, it would soon filter down, because what we're doing is we're preparing people for the world of work, and what work wants and what university wants filters down into school level. And I think that's where the change has to start. It's really difficult for someone like myself to impact a change in a traditional model. I can try stuff and people can be enthusiastic about the ideas, but this London interdisciplinary school, that sort of movement is where we're going to get the change from.
I really like what you're saying, Alex, because what we've been seeing with Mark before is actually the opposite, meaning that it's not higher ed which is driving the change in K-12, but vice versa. And actually we have seen very solid foundations with more of a traditional learning system in higher ed, because it has always been that way, and that's it, right? Yeah. So it's very interesting to hear your point of view, where it's the other way around, and basically if they get that change, in any case it will come down to K-12. And that initiative you shared about that school in London, fantastic. I had not heard about it, but now that you mentioned it, it makes total sense. I mean, I think it's much more appealing if you don't graduate as an engineer as such, but as someone who can solve problems related to X or Y fields, which is in your scope of engineering, which is your passion. And if that's the case, fantastic. We can certainly get more engagement as well. I think it can work better in terms of dropout rates as well. And what you were bringing in terms of grades, absolutely yes, and big yes from my end. I think there's a whole new spectrum that needs to be added in the current structure that we have both at higher ed and K to 12 in this occasion regarding grades, because we're seeing it. You said it perfectly. Last year, I mean, we all were like, how can this happen? It's and again, you said it very well. Technology had a very bad name on that. But the reality is that, okay, it's not only technology. Technology is the mean that failed to actually show that the problem is the grading system. And we're measuring everyone by the same level. And you said it before as well with your the throwing out the microphone at one or the other kid. You're measuring people by different standards. The ones who are shy, in any case, they get to try it in a different way. And I think it's very interesting from my perspective to see how those little actions are actually combining towards a drop down measure that you were explaining from your end, from K to 12, and actually starting by the job market, then K to 12, sorry, the job market, then higher ed, and then K to 12, rather than the other way around. So I'm interested in seeing those. I'm just sorry in seeing those other developments from a higher education perspective that can have a positive impact on K to 12. And if there's any other initiative that you've seen from your end and that you would like to share with us, I think that it's extremely that's called innovation for me, because that's not what we're seeing as much as from the K to 12 side. Why? Because on K to 12, we're integrating the fun side, we're integrating a little bit more of discovery, and maybe also the audience teaching in K to 12 is younger than the ones teaching at a higher education level. So maybe they feel actually more comfortable in a certain way with trying new things with kids rather than what we talked about before, being in a box. So, oh my God, maybe I'm gonna fail with this, and how am I gonna be perceived? And this whole point goes back to one conversation that I think it's really important to integrate as well, which is integrating mindfulness. And my question to you would be now around this topic, which is very important nowadays. How are you seeing this, not only for the students, but also for the staff, because of exactly what I was mentioning before, that if anything, maybe the staff needs it more than the kids. So how are we actually integrating this new framework of mindfulness within the actual school of the future?
Yeah, good question. And mindfulness has never been more important than now. It seems that coronavirus, there has been some positives from this pandemic, and this is one of them. It's okay to say that you need help. And they just released some statistics in the UK saying that 1 in every 6 children in the UK suffers from a mental health condition. And it's probably similar sort of numbers in terms of adults. So one of the initiatives, I talked about warm technology earlier on in the chat, and I'm just going to give a couple of examples of what I mean by that, because we're working with one of these companies, and what I am seeing on the ground is transformational change. So I'll start by talking about that. There's an Australian company based out of Sydney called Curious. That's what they're called. And they have developed a social emotional program called WISE, just WISE. And what it does is it puts the teacher, the parent, and the child through 9 weeks of virtual reality simulated journeys through an Oculus or Pico headset. So what happens is I put this on and I'm immersed in my own journey for 45 minutes. And in that journey, I get to meet the wise one. The wise one is a fictional character who is based on a clinical psychologist in Australia who talks you through breathing techniques, centering, how to sort of block out negative thoughts. And then you meet the boxlings, which are more fictional characters. And what we're finding, it's early days, but we've put some students through initial tests, and they're coming out feeling so much better about situations they're finding in life by doing VR journeys. And we're doing this in the future classroom. So we're embracing that warm technology. Yes, it's disrupting the learning, but it's doing it because it's serving a need. There is an issue with mental health, and this technology is helping with that issue. So I think there's more awareness of mental health, there's more acceptance of it, but I think a lot of people don't know what to do about it, if I'm honest. And this, I see, it hasn't come to market yet. I believe it's coming out in May. We're just trying it out, but I've been blown away by this program. And the students have a workbook that they reflect, and they do one lesson a week. It's also written for adults, so I've had a go at doing it, and it's phenomenal. You get transported to a beach in Australia, somewhere in Sydney, which is beautiful, and you're there and you're focusing on the dolphins and the waves and the rock pools, and it's so calming. And then, have you guys heard of a company called No Isolation? They're a Finnish startup company. You come across these guys?
No.
They've designed a robot head, right? It's about this big, and it is being used predominantly for terminally ill children that can't attend school. And the robot head goes into the lesson, and the student sits at home with a tablet, and the robot is their eyes and their kind of communication. So it can, in real time, it can see the learning, it can be involved in it, can raise its hand. If it doesn't understand something, it goes red. And then the most beautiful thing about this warm technology is at break time, the other students take it out and socialize it, so the child at home is involved in that process. Now, that is the sort of technology that I'm interested in, and that's the sort of technology that we've got in our future classroom. And they're just two examples that I know of and that are working in education. And I think the future is about finding more like that, like the WISE program, to try and help with things like mindfulness and having awareness of oneself, I guess.
Fantastic.
That's amazing. I mean, that to me is like we're talking about technology really augmenting the impact that you can have, because stuff like mental health, like you say, I mean, a lot of teachers were not equipped to deal with it. It's it's a huge responsibility, enough to have responsibility for someone's child, but to take responsibility for explicitly for their mental health, and to actually kind of try to open something up and have a discussion is fraught with real difficulty, and people, a lot of teachers quite understandably say, no way, I don't really want to try this. And the typical approach is being kind of, and I've written these things myself, like journaling activities and stuff like that, encouraging self-reflection. Let's watch a wee video on the negativity bias and understand where negative thoughts come from. But in the end, it's still an uncomfortable environment to share anything about mental health. And the great thing about VR is just like it's privacy.
Yeah,
it's experiential, but it's experiential in a very private way, which is fantastic.